As we know, the United States is facing inflation and facing future serious inflation as we traipse into who knows what potential hyperinflation. A few years ago, I was looking at a parallel to this inflation, the worst case type of inflation situation, and I wrote a little article about Zimbabwe's colonization, politics, and monetary policy. I wanted to read this because don't think it can't happen in a lot of places. I think globally, fiat is going to start really crumbling. It's going to happen here or there or broadly, and then the U.S. is not unaffected by that. The U.S., of course, is being floated by a number of things. Then again, it's a fiat war, and I guess we'll just see. Zimbabwe is standing out as one of the most amazing situations that the world's ever seen, but it's entertaining as well. So let me read this. And it brings to mind the idea that like people see things costing more and they're like, well, these things cost more, and they'll want to focus on the manufacturing or the production or the supply or whatnot. And it's not so much that as it is the monetary debasement that trickles down. So monetary theory asserts that a general increase in overall prices is less due to the worth of the items bought and sold, but rather a devaluation of the money being used. This has both objective and subjective components. Objectively, that the money has no tangible backing to give it a particular value, such as gold or other limited asset. And then subjectively, that the people holding the money lack confidence in its ability to retain value. We see all of that happening today with every currency, fiat currency. Crucial to both components is discipline over the creation of additional money. Excessive expansion of the money supply is inherently inflationary, which occurs with all fiat currencies, including the United States Federal Reserve note. Brings us to Rhodesia. I'm going to bring up, excuse me, picture of Rhodesia here. Rhodesia is no longer a country of its own. It became Zimbabwe, but I will bring it up here to point out the history of Rhodesia and later Zimbabwe. In 1890, the British South Africa Company of Cecil Rhodes, hence Rhodesia, Cecil Rhodes being a British colonizer leader in the United Kingdom, Cecil Rhodes demarcated Rhodesia. Rhodesia became a British colony in 1893, fully annexing it in 1923. In 1965, Rhodesian separatist leaders declared their independence from Britain. This uniquely was the first declaration of independence taken by a rebel British colony since the American Declaration in 1776. And Rhodesia cited that as a historic precedent to their actions. Britain viewed the declaration as an act of rebellion and petitioned the United Nations for sanctions against Rhodesia. The United Nations imposed its first ever trade embargo on an autonomous state. So the first ever trade embargo that the United Nations imposed was on Rhodesia, on the separatists. Hold on one second. I have to. Thank you. Okay, going on. So a civil war ensued in Rhodesia, and Robert Mugabe's political movement, supported by the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, adopted a Marxist-Leninist ideology. I imagine that was largely for support and help more than perhaps ideology, but then again, who knows? I'm not a historian on this stuff. I'm going to bring up pictures. Here's Mugabe. Mugabe was the president during this time. There were some pictures here from Rhodesia. This is a historic picture during the war of what was going on at the time. So not fun times. Going back to our article here. In 1979, after many years of conflict, the British government invited Rhodesian leaders from all sides of the ongoing civil war to meet and reach agreement on the terms for independence. Britain and the United Nations lifted their economic sanctions, And in 1980, an election was held, and Mugabe's party won in a landslide. So again, going back to Robert Mugabe here, Robert Mugabe became president officially of what became Zimbabwe. Representing Britain, Prince Charles formally granted independence to the new nation of Zimbabwe. For over a decade, economic indicators in Zimbabwe remained strong, primarily supported by wheat and tobacco farming. Starting in 1991, Zimbabwean President Mugabe began an economic program that had serious negative effects on the economy. In the late 1990s, the government instituted land reforms intended to evict legacy colonial landowners, we've seen that elsewhere in Africa, and transfer land ownership to non-colonial Africans who didn't have the experience in agriculture. Largely, many farms fell into disrepair or were handed over to Mugabe loyalists. From 1999 to 2009, the country experienced a sharp drop, not just in food production, but in all economic sectors. Banking collapsed, and farmers were unable to obtain loans for capital development. Unemployment rose. Unemployment went to 80%, and life expectancy dropped. In 2000, Zimbabwe began printing money to finance war in Congo, as well as to pay higher salaries for army and government officials. Institutionalized corruption resulted in a lack of confidence by the people in the future of their country and in the faith of their currency. All Zimbabwean dollars of this era are signed by Gideon Gono, governor of the Federal Reserve, or the Reserve Bank, I should say, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And they're printed with the statement, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand." What does that mean? Here's a picture of where this headed here. And I think you can see, oh, where is it? Yep, there it is, up at the top of the bill. Now they reached a point here, we'll get into it. They ended up printing a bill, a note, for $100 trillion. And up here it says, "I promise to pay the bearer on demand." Pay in what? For what? That's an interesting question. So that's funny. From 2008 to 2009, it was difficult to measure Zimbabwe's hyperinflation because the government of Zimbabwe stopped filing official inflation statistics because they were so bad. However, in mid-November 2008, Zimbabwe's peak month of inflation is estimated at 79.6 billion% month on month. What is that? That would be 89 septillion annually here. It's like, okay, there's 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion. What's after quintillion? I'd have to look it up. I'm going to call it septillion. I don't know. Sextillion? 89.7, almost 90, whatever is above quintillion. So call it infinity. That was their annual inflation. So it just went to zero. In 2006, the Reserve Bank recalled their previous notes in exchange for new notes, and they just slashed 3 zeros off the currency. I'm going to bring the article back up so you can read it if you want. In 2007, the Zimbabwean government declared inflation illegal. It is illegal to inflate. Okay. So anyone who raised the prices for goods and services were subject to arrest. So here they're targeting, say, businesses and individuals for trying to respond to a deflated dollar, as opposed to, let's say, not printing the money. So you can be arrested if you inflate. Shop owner. Now, historically, this is shown to be ineffective in halting inflation, trying to do that route. So, and at this time, Gideon Gono, throughout this hyperinflation era, well, Gideon earned his PhD in strategic management from the Atlantic International University in Honolulu, Hawaii. Clap for Gideon there for his education. In 2008, Gideon Gono announced a new Zimbabwean dollar, this time with 10 more zeros removed. So it's the same money. They just cut off zeros. Maybe that'll work. So the new $10 billion Zimbabwean dollar would be redenominated to be one Zimbabwean dollar. This move was not just to slow inflation, but to also make transaction computations manageable. So you ever have that situation where you have an old calculator and you got to do like some $100 million calculation or maybe $1 billion and it runs out of digits? Yeah, I think cash registers couldn't calculate things, I'm sure. And everybody was probably doing that anyway. So they just cut the dollars, the zeros off the dollar. In 2009, the Reserve Bank dropped 12 more zeros from the currency. Didn't work the first or the second time. Let's cut more zeros off the tail end. So this new Zimbabwe dollar was thus worth, one Zimbabwean dollar was thus worth 10 trillion original Zimbabwean dollars. I'm sorry, I have to laugh. It's just ridiculous. In late 2009, the government abandoned printing Zimbabwean dollars and now relies on the inflationary United States dollar for a more stable monetary reference. They kind of gave up and were like, okay, everybody's probably trying to, this was before stable coins, which, countries all over kind of relying on now to escape some of their fiat. So they kind of just did it official. Okay, we're just going to use the US dollar. It's the global reserve currency, even as I'm sure they had IMF or who knows what loans at interest given to them. And I'm going to bring up the new dollar they have is called the ZIG. It's supposed to be gold backed. The ZIG was announced. So on February 12th, 2024, Zimbabwe's Minister for Finance and Economic Development, Mthuli Ncube, I probably mispronounced that, he announced that the government is introducing a new currency to replace the country's worthless dollar, stating, quote, "The way to do that is perhaps to link the exchange rate to some hard asset such as gold." Could work. I don't know. Let's think about that for a moment. Gold-backed currency. I wonder if it really is. The U.S. itself went off that in 1971. We've seen how that's gone. Maybe Zimbabwe will have a better chance here if they're tethered their Zimbabwean ZIG dollar to gold. And do they stick to it? I haven't checked up on news just lately. I wonder if they're still on it. That was a couple of years ago. So I guess time can tell. In the meantime, the U.S. dollar is not tied to gold or any hard asset. So here's my thought: is get out of fiat, escape fiat, walk through the door, get yourself some Bitcoin. That's what I got today, folks. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.